Claire Bennett had only $17 left in her wallet. At 24, she was raising her little brother alone in a broken trailer after losing their mother to cancer. Most nights, she pretended she'd already eaten so Tyler could have the last bowl of oatmeal. She thought life couldn't get any harder. Then a letter arrived. A grandfather she'd never met had left her an old farmhouse in Raven Creek. But hidden inside that forgotten house was a secret her grandfather spent his life protecting. A secret powerful enough to change thousands of lives, and dangerous enough to destroy hers. Stay with me, because what Claire discovers next will change her life forever, and it just might change yours too. The first thing Claire Bennett did every morning was count the money left in her wallet. That morning, she counted $17. 17. Not enough for rent, not enough for groceries, barely enough to get through the week. She slipped the bills back into her old leather wallet. Inside were only two other things: a faded photo of her mother and a tiny folded note written in messy handwriting. Best sister ever. Love, Tyler. Claire smiled sadly and closed the wallet. At 24, she was raising her 11-year-old brother, Tyler, alone in an old trailer on the edge of Maple Creek. The heater barely worked. The roof leaked every time it rained. And after her mother died from cancer 2 years ago, this run-down trailer was all they had left. Claire worked 3 jobs. She served coffee at dawn, cleaned offices at night, delivered groceries on weekends. Some days she worked 16 hours and still came home wondering how she'd keep the lights on. But she never complained, not in front of Tyler. That morning, she stood at the stove stirring oatmeal while Tyler struggled to put on his shoes. "Claire," he asked quietly. She looked over. His sneaker had split open. His toe pushed through the fabric. Claire felt something break inside her. "When did this happen?" she asked softly. "A while ago. Why didn't you tell me?" Tyler shrugged. "I know money's tight." Claire turned away quickly so he wouldn't see her eyes fill with tears. He was only 11, and already trying to protect her. "We'll get you new ones," she said. Tyler smiled. He always believed her, even when she lied. A few minutes later, Claire pushed the only bowl of oatmeal toward him. "What about you?" Tyler asked. "I already ate." It wasn't true. The refrigerator held nothing but ketchup and an old carton of baking soda. But Tyler pretended to believe her, just like she pretended everything was okay. He looked at her carefully. "Are we going to lose the trailer?" Claire froze. "I heard you crying last night." For a second, she almost told him the truth, that rent was overdue, that the landlord wanted them out, that she had no idea what to do next. But she couldn't, not to him, so she smiled, a tired smile. "I won't let anything happen to us. You promise?" Claire squeezed his hand. "I promise." After Tyler left for school, the silence inside the trailer felt unbearable. Claire opened her wallet again. $17. She stared at her mother's photo. "Mom," she whispered, "I don't know how to do this anymore." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Then, a knock at the door. Claire wiped her eyes and opened it. No one. Just the cold Montana wind, and an envelope lying on the porch. Cream-colored. Heavy. Her name written in elegant handwriting. Claire frowned. Then she saw the return address: Bennett and Hayes Law Offices, Raven Creek, Montana. Her heart stopped, because beneath it was a name she hadn't heard in years. Charles Bennett, her grandfather, the man her mother hated, the man she'd warned Claire never to find. Suddenly, she remembered her mother's trembling voice. "If anyone from Raven Creek ever contacts you, Claire had asked. Why? Her mother looked terrified. The Bennett family didn't lose everything by accident. And if anyone discovers what's hidden there... She squeezed Claire's hand tightly. They'll come after you too. Claire stared at the envelope. Every instinct told her to throw it away. Instead, she opened it. And with that single decision, the life she'd been fighting to survive was about to become something far more dangerous and far more extraordinary. Claire barely slept that night. The letter sat on the kitchen table beside her mother's photograph, as if the past and the future had decided to meet at the worst possible moment. She read it 3 times. Charles Bennett, her grandfather, had passed away 3 weeks earlier. As his only living heir, she had inherited everything. A farmhouse, several acres of land, and all personal belongings. Location Raven Creek, Montana. Claire stared at the words until they blurred. Everything. It was strange, she thought. A man she'd never met had somehow left her more than life ever had. The next morning, Tyler found her sitting at the table. Are we moving? He asked. Claire looked up. I don't know. Is it far? About 4 hours. Tyler thought for a moment. Do they have a grocery store? Claire laughed softly. I hope so. And pizza. I really hope so. He grinned. That settled it. 3 weeks later, after selling what little they owned, Claire and Tyler drove west in her rusty pickup truck. The farther they went, the fewer houses they saw. The highways narrowed. The mountains grew taller. By sunset, a thick fog rolled over the valley. A weathered wooden sign appeared beside the road. Welcome to Raven Creek. Someone had painted over part of the sign years ago. The letters looked scarred, forgotten. Tyler leaned toward the window. This place is creepy. Claire couldn't argue. The town was small. Too small. Old brick buildings lined the main street. The gas station looked deserted. People glanced at them as they drove by. Not curious. Not friendly. Just watching. Claire tried to ignore it, until she stopped at a small grocery store. An elderly woman stood behind the counter. She smiled at Tyler, then looked at Claire. What family are you with? Bennett. The woman's smile disappeared. The room suddenly felt colder. Bennett, she repeated. Claire nodded. My grandfather was Charles Bennett. The old woman's eyes widened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, that house should have stayed empty. Claire frowned. What do you mean? But the woman had already turned away. Good luck, she muttered. Not kindly. Sadly. Back in the truck, Tyler whispered. I don't think she liked us. Claire forced a smile. Maybe she's just having a bad day. But deep down, she wasn't so sure. 20 minutes later, they reached the property. Claire slowed the truck and forgot how to breathe. The farmhouse stood alone at the end of a winding dirt road. 3 stories tall. White paint peeling. Windows dark. The porch sagging beneath decades of snow and rain. Behind it stretched acres of empty land. And beyond that, mountains. Silent and endless. Tyler stared. That's ours? Claire nodded slowly. I think so. The house looked lonely. Not abandoned. Lonely, as if it had been waiting. She climbed the porch steps carefully. The wood creaked beneath her boots. Inside, dust floated through thin beams of evening light. Old furniture sat covered in white sheets. A grandfather clock stood frozen at 8:17. The air smelled of cedar and old books. Tyler wandered into the living room. Do you think Grandpa lived here all alone? Claire looked around. I think he did. The thought made her chest ache. What kind of life had he lived? Why had her mother hated him so much? And why had he left everything to her? That first night, they slept in sleeping bags beside the fireplace. The electricity worked. Mostly, the pipes groaned. The wind rattled the windows. Tyler fell asleep almost instantly, but Claire couldn't. The house made noises, tiny creaks, soft groans, like it was remembering something. Around midnight, she got up and wandered into the kitchen. Moonlight spilled across the wooden floor. Her flashlight swept across the faded wallpaper, then stopped. At the far end of the hallway, there was a door, or at least something that looked like one. It blended almost perfectly into the wall, hidden beneath layers of paint. Claire stepped closer, ran her fingers across the surface. There, a seam, perfectly straight. Her heartbeat quickened. A hidden room. She shook her head. No, too many movies. Too little sleep. She turned away, but she couldn't stop thinking about it. The next morning, Tyler was exploring upstairs when she heard him shout, "Claire!" Fear shot through her. She ran. What happened? Tyler stood in an old bedroom, kneeling beside the floor, eyes wide, excited. I found something. One of the floorboards had shifted, just slightly, enough for his small fingers to pry it loose. Beneath it was a narrow compartment. Inside lay several bundles wrapped in oilcloth. Claire carefully lifted one out. Heavy. Old. Her hands trembled as she untied the string. Inside were papers, hundreds of them. Blueprints, detailed drawings, equations, complex diagrams, and at the bottom, a leather journal. The cover cracked as she opened it. The first page contained only 6 words, written in neat black ink. If you found this, you're finally ready. Claire stared at the page. A chill ran down her spine. Tyler looked up at her. What does it mean? Claire swallowed. Outside, the wind picked up. The old house creaked softly around them. And for the first time since arriving in Raven Creek, Claire Bennett realized something. Her grandfather hadn't simply left her a house, he had left her a secret. And somehow, she already knew. Her life was never going to be ordinary again. Claire couldn't stop staring at the journal. If you found this, you're finally ready. The words were simple. Yet somehow, they felt heavier than anything she'd ever read. Tyler sat cross-legged beside her on the dusty floor, ready for what he asked. Claire shook her head. I don't know. But she was about to find out. The journal belonged to Charles Bennett. Every page was filled with neat handwriting, sketches, and notes that Claire barely understood. Some entries talked about loneliness. Others talked about regret. But one phrase kept appearing over and over again. The heart. Chapter 3. The heart is stable for 11 minutes. Day 127. They offered me money again. Day 215. I will never let them have the heart. Claire frowned. Who were they? And what exactly was the heart? The further she read, the stranger it became. There were diagrams unlike anything she'd ever seen. Complex coils, copper rings, equations covering entire pages. And one sketch appeared more than any other. A machine, tall as a washing machine, wrapped in copper tubing. At its center sat a glowing sphere. Beneath it, Charles had written, "The heart, independent energy generation system." Claire stared at the drawing. This looks like something from a science fiction movie. Tyler leaned closer. Do you think Grandpa built it? Claire laughed softly. I think Grandpa imagined it. But even as she said it, she wasn't sure. The next few days passed in a blur. Claire cleaned. Tyler explored. Together, they opened old cabinets and dust-covered trunks. The house slowly began to feel less like a museum and more like a home. But the journal never left Claire's side. Every night she read until her eyes hurt. And every night, the mystery deepened. Then she found an entry dated 28 years earlier. The handwriting was shaky, uneven, almost frightened. Victor came today. He says my invention could change the world. He says investors are ready, but I saw greed in his eyes. I told him no. A few lines later, if anything happens to me, the heart must remain hidden. Claire sat upright. Victor? Who was Victor? And hidden where? On Friday evening, the answer came unexpectedly. Tyler burst into the kitchen, covered in dust. Claire, she nearly dropped her coffee. What happened? You have to come. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the barn. The old structure stood 50 yards behind the farmhouse. Claire hadn't paid much attention to it. The roof sagged. The doors barely opened. It looked ready to collapse. Until now, Tyler pointed toward the back wall. I found a room. Claire laughed. No, you didn't. I did. He dragged her inside. Dust floated in the afternoon sunlight. Broken tools lay scattered everywhere. Then Claire saw it. The floorboards. Near the back corner. Different color? Newer wood. Her heartbeat quickened. Together, they pulled away an old rug. There, a metal ring, embedded in the floor. Tyler's eyes widened. I told you. Claire gripped the ring. Pulled. Nothing. Again, the hatch groaned. Then slowly, opened. A rush of cold air escaped. Tyler took a step back. Whoa! Beneath them stretched a staircase descending into darkness. Claire stared, her heart pounding. No. No way. This couldn't be real. Could it? She grabbed a flashlight. Stay close. The stairs creaked beneath their weight. Step by step they descended. The air grew colder. The smell changed. Not mold. Not decay. Metal. Oil. Electricity. Claire's flashlight swept across the room, and she froze. It wasn't a storage cellar. It was a laboratory. Rows of shelves lined the walls. Blueprints hung inside glass frames. Workbenches overflowed with strange instruments. And in the center of the room stood the machine. Claire forgot to breathe. It was exactly like the sketch. Copper coils wrapped around a steel frame. Glass tubes connected to a polished sphere at the center. Dust covered everything. Except the machine. Its surface gleamed, as if someone had cleaned it. Recently, Tyler whispered. Claire. She slowly stepped closer. There was a brass plate fixed to the front. The engraving was still visible. The heart. Prototype 4. Charles Bennett. Claire's pulse hammered in her ears. Oh my God. Tyler grinned. He built it. Claire reached out. Her fingertips brushed the metal. Warm. She jerked her hand back. Warm. That wasn't possible. The machine hadn't been used in decades. Had it? Her breathing grew shallow. Then she noticed something else. A tiny red light. Blinking. Once. Twice. Again. Tyler saw it too. Did you see that? Claire nodded slowly. No. The red light blinked again. Steady. alive. A chill ran down her spine. The machine wasn't dead. It had never been dead. Suddenly, she remembered the final lines from the journal. If you're reading this, do not trust Victor Blackwell. And whatever you do, don't turn the heart on. Claire's eyes widened. Too late. A low humming sound filled the room. Tyler looked terrified. Claire. The red light turned blue. The copper coils began to glow, and somewhere deep inside the machine, something awakened. Claire took a step backward. Her grandfather hadn't hidden a dream beneath this barn. He had hidden a miracle. Or something far more dangerous. And for the first time in her life, Claire Bennett was truly afraid. Claire didn't sleep that night. Not because she was afraid. At least, not anymore. She sat alone in the hidden laboratory beneath the barn, wrapped in an old blanket, staring at the heart. The machine was quiet now. The blue glow had faded, but every once in a while, a faint pulse of light flickered deep inside its core, soft and steady, like a heartbeat. Tyler had been the one to name it. It feels alive, he'd whispered before bed. Claire had laughed at first, but now, sitting in the silence, she wasn't so sure. She opened Charles Bennett's journal again. The pages smelled of dust and cedar. For hours she read, not just about the machine, about the man, and for the first time in her life, she began to know her grandfather. He wasn't the monster her mother had described. He wasn't cold, or selfish, or cruel. He was lonely, brilliant, and terribly misunderstood. One entry stopped her cold. April 14th, 1992. Emily came to visit today. Claire blinked. Emily, her mother. She asked me why I care more about my machine than my family. I didn't know how to explain that I built it for her. Claire swallowed hard. She kept reading. I wanted a world where she never had to choose between medicine and food. A world where families like ours could survive. But I failed her. The ink smeared across the page, as if tears had fallen there decades ago. Claire stared at the words. All her life, she'd believed her grandfather abandoned her mother. But what if he'd been trying to protect her? The next morning, Tyler found Claire crying. Not loudly, just quietly. Holding the journal against her chest. What happened? He asked. Claire wiped her eyes. I think Grandma was wrong. We never had a grandma. Claire laughed softly. I mean Mom. Tyler sat beside her. What do you mean? Claire looked toward the heart. I think Grandpa loved us. Tyler was quiet. Then why didn't Mom forgive him? Claire had asked herself that question all night, and she still didn't know. Later that afternoon, she drove into town. Raven Creek looked different now. Less creepy. More sad. Like a place holding its breath. She parked outside the library. The building was tiny. Old brick. Warm, yellow lights glowing through the windows. Inside sat an elderly man with silver hair and round glasses. He looked up, smiled, then froze. His eyes widened. My goodness. Claire frowned. Are you okay? The man slowly stood. You have Charles Bennett's eyes. Claire's heart skipped. You knew him. The old man laughed softly. Knew him. He removed his glasses. He was my best friend. His name was Makas, 72 years old. Retired physics professor, and according to half the photographs hanging on the library walls, and once the smartest man in Raven Creek. For 2 hours, Claire listened. Walter told stories she'd never heard. Charles teaching neighborhood kids science in his garage. Charles repairing broken radios for free. Charles secretly paying electric bills for struggling families. He wasn't rich, Walter said, but he hated seeing people suffer. Claire smiled. That sounded familiar. It sounded like her mother. It sounded like her. Then Walter grew quiet. There was another man. Claire stiffened. Victor Blackwell. Walter's face darkened. You found that name. Claire nodded. He appears everywhere in the journals. Walter looked away. Victor was Charles's student, the smartest one he ever had. What happened? Walter sighed. Greed. Victor had wanted investors. Charles wanted freedom. Victor believed energy should be controlled. Charles believed it should belong to everyone. The arguments grew worse. Then, one day, Victor disappeared. A year later, he founded Blackwell Energy. Today, it was one of the largest energy companies in the country. Walter looked Claire straight in the eyes. And Charles, he disappeared too. Claire's chest tightened. Because of Victor, Walter hesitated, then nodded slowly. That's what most of us believe. Claire drove home in silence. The mountains looked different now. The farmhouse looked different. The barn looked different. Everything had changed. Because she had changed. For weeks, she thought about selling the property, paying off debts, starting over. But now, she couldn't. Not after learning the truth. Not after realizing what her grandfather had sacrificed. That evening, she sat on the porch beside Tyler. The sky burned orange behind the mountains. Tyler swung his legs. Are we going to sell the house? Claire looked at the barn, at the heart hidden beneath it, at the dream her grandfather had buried for 30 years. Slowly. She shook her head. No. Tyler smiled. Good. Claire laughed. You didn't even ask why. I know why. Oh yeah. He nodded. Because Grandpa believed ordinary people deserve something extraordinary. Claire stared at him. Those words. They were almost identical to something she'd read in the journal. How did you know that? Tyler shrugged. I don't know. Then he smiled. But I think Grandpa picked the right person. Claire looked toward the mountains. The wind blew softly through the trees. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel poor. She didn't feel scared. She didn't feel alone. She felt something else. Purpose. The kind that changes a person. The kind worth fighting for. And though she didn't know it yet, somewhere hundreds of miles away, Victor Blackwell had just learned one terrifying fact. Charles Bennett's granddaughter had returned, and the heart was beating again. For the next 2 weeks, Claire Bennett lived 2 lives. By day, she was still the same young woman from Maple Creek, the girl who clipped coupons, worried about bills, and stretched leftovers into another meal. But at night, she became something else. An investigator, a dreamer, the keeper of a secret so extraordinary that sometimes she wondered if she'd imagined the whole thing. Every evening, after Tyler fell asleep, Claire slipped into the hidden laboratory beneath the barn. She read Charles Bennett's journals one after another, dozens of them. The earliest entries were filled with excitement, the middle years with obsession, and the final journals with fear. March 7th, 1994. The heart worked for 27 minutes today, enough to power the workshop. I cried when the lights came on. September 18th, 1995. Victor offered me $15 million. I refused. He called me a fool. January 3rd, 1996. If I disappear, promise me this. Never let greed touch the heart. Claire closed the journal. Her throat tightened. $15 million. 30 years ago. How much would it be worth today? 50 million. 100. More. The thought terrified her. Not because of the money. Because of what people would do to get it. One night, she finally asked the question she'd been avoiding. Do you think Grandpa was telling the truth? Walter Hayes adjusted his glasses. They were sitting in the library after hours. The blueprints spread across the table. Walter had spent days studying them. And every day, his expression grew more stunned. I've been teaching physics for 40 years, he said quietly. And I've never seen anything like this. Claire's heart sank. So it's impossible. Walter looked up sharply. No. His voice almost shook. That's what scares me. He pointed at one of the diagrams. This energy conversion system. He paused. Claire waited. Walter removed his glasses. Claire, if these calculations are right, he looked toward her as if afraid of his own words. Your grandfather was decades ahead of everyone. Claire stared at him. But it works. Walter nodded slowly. I know. The machine turned on. I know. It was warm. Walter froze. What did you say? Claire suddenly realized she had never told him. Not everything. She took a deep breath and told him. The hidden room. The staircase. The laboratory. The blinking blue light. Walter listened without interrupting. When she finished, the old man sat perfectly still, then quietly whispered, Take me there. The next morning, Walter Hayes stood in front of the heart and cried, not loudly, not dramatically, just tears sliding silently down an old man's face. Claire pretended not to notice. Walter slowly walked around the machine, running trembling fingers across the copper coils, the steel frame, the glass chamber at the center. Oh, Charles, he whispered. You crazy old fool. Claire smiled. You really think he built this? Walter looked offended. Think. He pointed at the brass plate. The heart. Prototype 4. Charles Bennett. Claire. Walter turned toward her. Your grandfather wasn't just a scientist. He was a visionary. The word echoed inside her. Visionary. Nobody had ever called anyone in her family that. Poor. Stubborn. Unlucky. Sure. But visionary. Never. Claire looked at the machine. At the dream hidden beneath decades of silence. And suddenly, she saw something she'd never allowed herself to imagine. A future. Not just survival. Not endless bills. Not choosing between groceries and rent. Something bigger. That evening, Tyler found her sitting outside the barn. You look weird. Claire laughed. Thanks. No, like... He sat beside her. Happy weird. Claire looked toward the sunset. The mountains glowed gold. Birds circled above the valley. For once. She wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I think Grandpa left us something important. Tyler grinned. The machine... Claire shook her head. I hope. Tyler thought about that. Then nodded. I like hope. 3 days later, a black SUV pulled into the driveway. Claire almost panicked, but Walter stepped out of the passenger seat smiling. Behind him came a woman in her 30s. Dark hair, sharp eyes, a leather briefcase tucked beneath her arm. This, Walter announced proudly, is Sarah Miller. Sarah extended her hand. I'm a patent attorney. Claire blinked. A what? Sarah laughed. The person you call before somebody steals your billion-dollar invention. Claire nearly choked. Billion. Sarah shrugged. If it works, Walter smiled. If. Sarah crossed her arms. I'll believe miracles when I see them. An hour later, Sarah wasn't smiling anymore. She stood frozen in front of the heart. Speechless, Claire couldn't blame her. The machine had that effect on people. Walter handed Sarah the journals, the blueprints, the calculations. Sarah read, then read again. Finally, she looked at Claire. Has anyone else seen this? Claire shook her head. Good. Sarah snapped the journal shut. Because the second people find out, her voice grew serious. Your life changes forever. Claire looked at the heart, at the soft blue pulse glowing within. Maybe that's okay. Sarah stared at her. You don't understand. No, Claire said softly. I think I do. For years, she'd lived in fear. Fear of bills. Fear of losing Tyler. Fear of tomorrow. But standing here, inside her grandfather's hidden dream, she felt something stronger than fear. She felt possibility. Sarah sighed. All right. She opened her briefcase, pulled out a stack of papers. First thing tomorrow, we file provisional patents. Walter grinned. Tyler pumped his fist. Claire laughed. The sound surprised her, because it had been a long time since laughter came so easily. That night, after everyone had gone home, Claire stood alone beside the heart. The blue light flickered softly, almost like breathing. She touched the brass plate and whispered, I don't know why you chose me. The machine hummed quietly. Somewhere above her, wind swept across the valley, and for the first time in years, Claire Bennett allowed herself to dream. She didn't know it yet, but in another state, inside a glass office overlooking a city skyline, a man named Victor Blackwell was staring at an old newspaper clipping. The headline read, Charles Bennett disappears without a trace. Victor's phone rang. He answered. A voice on the other end said, Sir. A pause. Then, she's found the heart. Victor slowly stood and smiled. Not warmly, not kindly, but like a man who had been waiting 30 years for this exact moment. Claire Bennett thought discovering the heart would change her life. She was wrong. It changed who she was. Because dreams, real dreams, the kind powerful enough to change the world, don't arrive alone. They bring fear, doubt, and people who will do anything to stop them. 3 days after Sarah filed the provisional patents, the first black SUV appeared outside the farmhouse. Then another, and another. They never stayed long. Just parked at the end of the dirt road, watching. Claire pretended not to notice, but Tyler noticed. They're back, he whispered one morning, peeking through the curtains. Claire looked outside. 2 men in suits stood beside the vehicles, talking. Looking toward the barn, her stomach tightened. It's okay, she lied. But the truth was, she was scared. Terrified, actually, because for the first time in years, she had something to lose. That afternoon, Sarah arrived carrying a thick folder. Her expression was grim. They know. Claire looked up. Who? Sarah tossed the folder onto the table. Inside were newspaper articles, business magazines, photos, all featuring one man, Victor Blackwell. Silver hair, sharp jaw, cold eyes, CEO of Blackwell Energy. Estimated net worth $14 billion. Tyler whistled. That's a lot. Sarah didn't smile. Victor built his empire on energy. She pointed to the folder. And Charles Bennett nearly destroyed it. Claire's chest tightened. So Mom was right. Sarah nodded. Your grandfather spent years hiding the heart. Not because he failed. Because he was afraid. Claire looked toward the barn. For a moment, she understood her grandfather more than ever. How lonely he must have felt. How frightened. And yet, he never destroyed his work. He kept believing. The knock came the next morning. 3 sharp raps. Claire opened the door. A man in a charcoal suit stood on the porch. Perfect posture. Perfect smile. Everything about him looked expensive. Miss Bennett. Claire nodded cautiously. He handed her a black envelope. My employer wishes to make you an offer. Who is your employer? The man smiled. You already know. Claire didn't open the envelope until he left. Inside was a single sheet of paper. $50 million. In exchange for all patents, all research, complete ownership of the heart. At the bottom was a handwritten message. You don't want this fight. Victor Blackwell. Claire stared at the paper. $50 million. More money than she'd ever imagined. Enough to buy a mansion. Enough to travel the world. Enough to make every problem disappear. Tyler peeked over her shoulder. Wow. Claire laughed nervously. Yeah. Then Tyler asked, Are you gonna sell it? The question hit her harder than expected. She looked toward the barn. Toward her grandfather's dream. Toward the machine that pulsed quietly beneath the earth. And suddenly she remembered something she'd read. This wasn't built for money. It was built for families. Claire folded the offer, then tore it in half. Tyler's eyes widened. Seriously. She smiled. Seriously. Sarah nearly had a heart attack. You what? Claire shrugged. I said no. Sarah paced the kitchen. Claire, do you realize what $50 million is? Claire nodded. Do you realize what Grandpa gave up to protect this? Sarah stopped. The room fell silent, because Claire wasn't the frightened girl from Maple Creek anymore. Something had changed. Slowly. Quietly. But completely. She started waking up earlier, reading journals before sunrise, working beside Walter in the lab, learning physics, learning business, learning patents, learning how to fight. Tyler helped too. He organized blueprints, labeled journals, and insisted on wearing safety goggles that were way too big for his face. One afternoon, Walter laughed. You know, he adjusted his glasses. Charles was exactly like you. Claire looked up. Stubborn. Walter grinned. Terrified. Claire blinked. Grandpa was scared. Walter nodded. All the time. He pointed toward the heart. Courage isn't building something extraordinary. It's protecting it. At night, Claire sat alone in the lab. The machine glowed softly, blue light reflecting in her eyes. For years, she'd thought strength meant never being afraid. But maybe strength was being afraid and choosing to move forward anyway. She thought about her mother, working double shifts, smiling through pain, protecting her children until the very end. Her mother had been brave. Her grandfather had been brave. Maybe she could be brave too. The next morning, she did something no one expected. She called a meeting. Walter, Sarah, Tyler. They gathered around the old wooden table beneath the barn. Claire took a deep breath, then said, I'm not selling. Sarah sighed. I know. Claire smiled. I'm not hiding either. That got everyone's attention. What do you mean? Walter asked. Claire looked at the heart, at the dream buried underground for 3 decades, and she knew If fear had ruled her grandfather's final years, she wouldn't let it rule hers. We show the world. Sarah nearly dropped her coffee. Absolutely not. Walter laughed. Tyler looked thrilled. Claire stood. For the first time in years, she felt taller somehow. Stronger. I spent my whole life trying not to lose things. My home. My mom. My future. She swallowed hard, and all it did was make me afraid. She placed a hand on the heart. But this, her voice trembled. This is bigger than me. Bigger than money. If Grandpa was willing to risk everything. She looked at Tyler, then Walter, then Sarah. I can too. The room fell silent. Walter smiled first, slowly, proudly. Sarah rolled her eyes, but Claire noticed tears forming there. And Tyler? Tyler jumped to his feet. I knew it. Claire laughed. So you're with me? Tyler grinned. Always. That evening, as the sun disappeared behind the mountains, Claire stood on the porch. The wind tugged gently at her hair. Somewhere inside the barn, the heart pulsed steadily. No longer a secret, no longer a burden, but a purpose. And for the first time in her life, Claire Bennett didn't feel like a poor girl trying to survive. She felt like someone capable of changing the world. What she didn't know was that Victor Blackwell had already boarded his private jet. Destination, Raven Creek. And he wasn't coming to negotiate anymore. The first interview almost didn't happen. Claire nearly canceled 3 times. She wasn't a scientist. She wasn't a CEO. She was a girl who used to count pennies at her kitchen table and pretend she'd already eaten so her little brother wouldn't worry. What business did she have standing in front of cameras? But Tyler wouldn't let her back out. You promised Grandpa, he said. Claire smiled. I never actually met Grandpa. Tyler shrugged. Yeah. Then he grinned. But I think he met you. The cameras arrived on a cold spring morning. Not many at first. A local reporter, a small news crew from Billings, a couple of bloggers. Walter fussed with his tie. Sarah paced nervously. Tyler kept practicing his wave. And Claire stood in front of the barn, staring at her shaking hands. I can't do this. Sarah looked at her. You already are. The interview lasted 20 minutes, but it changed everything. Claire didn't talk about technology. She didn't mention patents, or profits, or billion-dollar industries. She simply told the truth. How her mother died. How she'd worked 3 jobs. How Tyler wore shoes with holes because she couldn't afford new ones. How she'd almost thrown the letter away. And how one lonely old man had spent his life trying to build a kinder world. By the time she finished, the reporter was crying. So was Walter. Tyler pretended he had dust in his eyes. The story aired that night and exploded. Millions of views, then tens of millions. People weren't fascinated by the heart. Not really. They were fascinated by Claire, a young woman who had every reason to become bitter, but chose hope. A girl who had inherited pain and turned it into purpose. Letters began arriving by the hundreds, then thousands. A retired couple from Ohio mailed $20. We don't have much, they wrote, but we believe in you. A widow in Arizona sent $50. My husband always dreamed of free energy. Please finish what your grandfather started. A little boy from Texas mailed 5 crumpled dollars, along with a note. I asked Mom if heroes are real. She said yes. I think you're one. Claire cried reading that one. Actually, she cried reading most of them. Victor Blackwell watched all of it from his office and hated every second. Because people weren't buying into a machine. They were buying into an idea that ordinary people deserved extraordinary things, and ideas were far more dangerous than inventions. He sued. Of course he did. He claimed partial ownership, old contracts, questionable paperwork, anything to slow Claire down, but Sarah fought him, relentlessly. Walter testified. Tyler sat beside Claire every day in court, holding her hand whenever she got scared, and slowly, the truth came out. Victor had tried to buy the heart decades earlier. Charles Bennett had refused, then vanished from public life. Not because he failed, because he chose to protect his dream. The country fell in love with the story. Not because it was perfect, because it was human. 2 years later, the first Heart Home opened, a tiny white house in Wyoming, owned by a widow raising her grandchildren. When Claire flipped the switch, the lights came on instantly. The heater hummed to life, and the old woman covered her face and sobbed. "I can keep the heat on now," she whispered. "I don't have to choose anymore." Claire hugged her tightly, and suddenly, all those nights in the trailer, all those tears, all the fear, felt worth it. The Heart Foundation grew. 10 homes, then 50, then hundreds. Volunteers came from everywhere. Engineers, teachers, retirees, young students inspired by Charles Bennett. Walter became the foundation's advisor. Sarah, its legal director. Tyler. Well, Tyler became a teenager. Tall, smart, and somehow even more stubborn than Claire. One afternoon he stood beside the heart now displayed inside the foundation headquarters and smiled. "You know what?" Claire laughed. "What?" "You were wrong." "About what?" Tyler crossed his arms. "You thought Grandpa left us a machine." Claire looked at him, then at the glowing heart of copper and light. "No," Tyler said softly. "He left us courage." That night, Claire sat alone on the porch of the farmhouse. The same porch she'd first climbed years ago. The mountains stretched endlessly before her. The wind moved gently through the trees. Behind her, laughter echoed from the house. Tyler. Walter. Sarah. Family. Not the one she'd been born into. The one she'd built. Claire looked up at the stars and whispered, "We did it, Mom." Tears filled her eyes. Not tears of grief. Not anymore. Tears of gratitude. Because life hadn't been fair. It had been cruel. It had taken her mother, her childhood, her peace, but somehow, through all the heartbreak, it had also given her something extraordinary, a reason to keep going, a chance to make a difference, and the courage to believe that even the most broken stories can become beautiful. On the desk inside the farmhouse rests Charles Bennett's final journal, and tucked inside it is a letter Claire wrote years later. It says, "You spent your whole life waiting for the world to be ready. Turns out, you weren't waiting for the world. You were waiting for us. And Grandpa, we're finally ready." Years later. Claire Bennett still keeps the old wallet. Inside are only 3 things. A faded photograph of her mother. A small note that reads, "Best sister ever. Love, Tyler." And $17. The same $17 she once counted in tears, wondering how she would survive another week. She never spent them, because they remind her of who she used to be. A frightened young woman, living in a broken trailer, trying to raise her little brother with nothing but love and hope. Claire wasn't the smartest person. She wasn't rich, and she certainly wasn't fearless. She cried. She doubted herself. She almost gave up more times than she'd ever admit. But she kept going. And sometimes, that's all courage really is. Not being fearless. Just refusing to quit. Today, thousands of homes are powered by the heart. But Claire's greatest legacy isn't the machine her grandfather built. It's proving that ordinary people can do extraordinary things. That your past doesn't define you. And that even in your darkest moments, life can still surprise you. One evening, Tyler asked her, "Do you know why Grandpa chose you?" Claire smiled. "Because I was stubborn." Tyler laughed. "No." He looked at her and said, "Because when everybody else gave up, you didn't. And maybe." That's the lesson we all need to remember. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be fearless. You just have to keep going. Because sometimes, the people who change the world are simply the ones who refuse to give up. The end.